This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, we're seeing in this country 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals. We're seeing food bank usage at record levels we've never seen before because of high taxes, and they're only growing. And people can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves today. Mr. Charlebois, in a National Post article, you're quoted as saying that the carbon tax has made expenses go up, and there's a compounding effect with this tax into the supply chain. Could you give your opinion on, if you could break that down to what parts of the supply chain, if you can, that the carbon tax hits the supply chain the most?
Thank you for the question. What we've noticed over the last few months, when you look at the CPI, a lot of attention is given to the CPI. I think it's really the wrong focus. We need to focus on the IPPI, the Industry Product Price Index. And if you look at pricing over the last, I'd say, 3-4 years, the IPPI has outpaced the CPI in food, which means that pressures are real across the supply chain, particularly in processing, transportation, and logistics. And I think that's where we need to focus on, which is why I think it's important to pause, not eliminate the carbon tax, but to pause to better appreciate what is happening with the food industry. I talk to companies and even restaurants, and they're feeling the pressure, and it's never been measured. Measuring the effects of the carbon tax on retail is impossible because of all of us. Consumers impact prices every single day. It cannot be measured.
So in your opinion, we shouldn't just be looking at the fact, yes, the Bank of Canada did say carbon tax is inflationary, and it's about 1.1%, but it does go beyond that, in your opinion, correct?
Absolutely. I did contact the Bank of Canada to ask for the arithmetic behind the 0.15%. And as I mentioned earlier, it only looks at 3 components of the CPI, and it doesn't evaluate the compounding effect of the carbon tax across the supply chain. And that needs to be measured.
Thank you. In your opinion, could you break down what groups in our society get disproportionately hit hardest by this carbon tax when it comes to buying food? Because we see that the carbon tax does have an effect on consumers when they're buying food because prices have gone up.
We can't say how the carbon tax is impacting people because, again, we can't correlate carbon tax with food prices, but we can certainly look at food inflation and demographics. And clearly, single-parent households, seniors with fixed incomes are largely hit. Right now, because of mortgage rates, particularly what we're noticing in our data, Millennials are hard hit right now. They are in the middle of that perfect storm: food inflation, shelter costs, and it's the largest group that we have in terms of generations.
Absolutely. I mean, after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, rents and mortgages have doubled. It's because of the high deficits, and we know this through the Bank of Canada. The deficits fueled inflation, and they had to raise the interest rates for that. Moving on, when we're talking about shrinkflation. Inflation and taxes have led to, obviously, producers shrinking the size of the servings in their products, but prices still remain high. How prevalent is this in the foods that are healthy?
So just this year, we believe that over 20 products have been shrinkflated and are now taxed because of the size of the container. And that's why we recommend that the zero-rate policy that is maintained by the CRA should be revised at this point. There are so many products. In fact, I brought this one example. This is a Canadian-made, Halifax-made product made with local, carried by Sobeys and Loblaws. This product is $3.75. There's basically 5 ingredients in that bar, okay? 5. It's natural, sustainable, made with local products. You add an extra tax on that at the teller. You pay 15% more on tax in Nova Scotia. And so that's why we think that some products, a lot of Canadians think that if it's taxed, it's unhealthy. Not necessarily. This product is very healthy.
I want to focus it a little bit on that carbon tax and not just specifically for food, because you made this argument with it affecting supply chain and having a compounding effect. When a single mom that you said is disproportionately affected by the carbon tax and the higher food inflation, it doesn't also factor in the fact that for her to drive her kid around to sports school, that when she's filling up her gas, that price has gone up too because of the carbon tax. Also, for her to heat her home, that cost has gone up too. So do you think that all these are factors that are also affecting those vulnerable people that you mentioned?
I can't comment on other sectors. We only look at food, but the one thing we've noticed is that Canadians are actually spending less on food despite food inflation. So obviously other things which are costing more are really impacting families, and so right now a lot of families are trading down, and we just actually published a report about a month ago suggesting that almost 70% of Canadians are actually making nutritional compromises as a result of these financial pressures.
Professor Charlebois, in your article this spring, you talked about the terrible essentially inequality given to businesses with respect to the carbon tax. So, and I think you reiterated the CFIB's position on this, who basically said, the Liberals have argued, well, most people get back more than they pay. But when it comes to the millions of small businesses across this country, that's not true at all. In fact, I think you said in your article that small businesses pay about $8 billion in the carbon taxes and got back about $35 million. Are you still of that opinion?
Thank you for the question. The reality is that we do import foods from abroad, and those foods aren't subject to our carbon price policy. If you look at Loblaws, for example, 80% of the food that Loblaws will sell is imported from elsewhere, which actually is making, and this is really the argument that we're trying to make here, which would make our processing sector less competitive. And this is a company with 10 employees, led by a wonderful female CEO in Halifax, struggling to make things happen. I can name many companies in Canada, SMEs, trying to compete against other companies. It's not a level playing field, unfortunately. And I think we need, and again, I'm not suggesting we should scrap the tax, because I think it's actually an important policy for Canada to fight climate change, as far as I'm concerned. But when it comes to food affordability and food security, I do think we need to evaluate this picture way more than what we're doing right now.
Given the government won't stop spending, my question is this. There will be a tax increase coming from this government. Mr. Dacus, in order to balance the budget, how much would AHST have to be increased to balance our budget?
Sure. So what we do at the CD Institute is we take a look out to the future. And what the government's been doing is their outlook to the future in terms of many decades out, in terms of what their projected debt to GDP ratio is. It kind of assumes that everything's going to go hunky-dory on the economy for the next couple decades. But we all know that's not true. We all know that a recession is probably going to come at some point in that period. And the question just becomes how much, how bad it is, when it comes, how long, and no one knows that. So what we do is we forecast a range of different assumptions about when that might go, and look at the average of what various recessions might look like. And looking out many years from now, in order to keep under a reasonable assumption about what kind of the recessions we might face in the future, just to get our debt to GDP down back to our pre-pandemic level, we're looking at needing to increase the GST rate by 2%. And if we're looking to pay back our COVID, all of the debt taken out during COVID, GST of 4%, or GST that's 4% higher.
Thank you very much. So we'd be looking at a significant tax increase if, in fact, the spending is not under control, perhaps up to as high as 4% increase in the HST.